Welcome to another English language class. My name is Happiness Demo, and today we'll be studying tenses, future tense, in the theme grammatical accuracy. Now bear in mind that this is the third part of our lesson on tenses. Before we go into our lesson today, let's take a look at the objectives for this lesson. By the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define tense, list and explain the future tenses, and make sentences with future tenses. Now let's go into our lesson for today. In our previous lessons, we had talked about tense, and we said tense refers to the form or structure of verbs when they show different times of action. We did say that verbs occur or happen at different points in time. Some verbs can be ongoing while you speak about them. Some other verbs must have happened at some point in the past, and some others will happen at some point in the future. Now we classified tense into three simple tenses, and we said we have the present tense, the past tense, and the future tense. In previous lessons, we had looked at the present tense and the past tense. We did say that present tense is used for actions that happen regularly, often, or out of duty or routine, and not necessarily at the point when you are speaking about them. Actions that happen regularly. For example, Nkechi reads her book. This sentence is in the present tense because the verb reads indicates or expresses an action that happens regularly. Nkechi reads her book. We also talked about the past tense, and we did say that past tense is used to refer to verbs that happened at some point in the past. For example, Nkechi ate rice yesterday. This sentence is written in past tense because the verb ate refers to an action that took place the previous day, so it's in the past tense. For today's lesson, we will consider the future tense. Now, when we say an action is expressed in the future tense, what do we mean? When we express actions that will begin at some point in the future, we use the future tense. So when an action will begin at some point in the future, we use the future tense to express such actions. What this means is that such actions have not happened yet, but they are yet to happen in the future. Now let's take some sentences written in the future tense. Okocha will study hard for his SSCE next year. Okocha will study hard. This action will happen at some point in the future. Kemi will register for computer lessons during the holidays. Kemi will register. So this also means it's a future action. The painter will come home next week. Will come also indicates a future action. He hasn't come yet, but he will come next week. Father told me he will get me a present for my birthday next month. We haven't gotten to my birthday month yet, but Father said he will get me a present. So these are sentences written in the future tense that express actions which are yet to happen at some point in the future. Now let's look at the classifications of future tenses. Now the future tense is divided into three simple types. We have the simple future tense, we have the future perfect tense, and then we have the future continuous tense. Bear in mind that this lesson deals with just the future tense. We've talked about the present tense, we've talked about the past tense in previous lessons. So we are going to discuss the simple future tense, the future perfect tense, and the future continuous tense in this lesson. Now, first of all, let's talk about the simple future tense. What is the simple future tense all about? We use the simple future tense to express actions that will take place at some point in the future, like the next hour, tomorrow, or next month. Whenever we refer to actions that will happen sometime in future, apart from when we are speaking, or sometime ahead of the time of speaking, we are referring to verbs or actions expressed in the future tense. The future tense is formed by using the modal auxiliary verb will and the base or ordinary form of the verb. Now, the base or ordinary form of the verb is the form of the verb without any suffix or any addition towards the end of the verb. Just the way we find them in the dictionary: go, sleep, jump, and so on. So we have here the verb go, come, study, write, jump. These are all verbs in their base or ordinary form. So we form the future tense, the simple future tense, with the modal auxiliary verb will and the base or ordinary form of the verb. Now let's take some examples. Amy will join the debate team next term. If you look at these words in red, you find the modal auxiliary verb will, and then you find the verb join in its base form. Now, this sentence is expressed in the simple future tense. The next sentence says, Eruke told her sisters that she will visit them during the holidays. Here also we find the modal auxiliary verb will together with the base form of the verb visit. So Eruke told her sisters that she will visit them during the holiday. She would perform an action during the holiday, which is at some point in the future. Fola will prepare well for the spelling bee on Thursday. Will prepare is expressed in the simple future tense because we have the modal auxiliary verb will and the base form of the verb prepare. Now, just like I said, note that the base form, whenever you hear base form or ordinary form of a verb, simply refers to that form of the verb without any suffix or inflection on the verb, without any extra words attached to the verb. Now, still talking about the simple future tense, we use the simple future tense to make negative sentences. The sentences we looked at earlier in the previous slide are positive sentences. Apart from that, we can use them to make negative sentences. Now, the negative form of sentences are made when we mean to say that something is incorrect, untruthful, or non-existent. When you mean that an action is incorrect, untruthful, or does not exist, we use the negative form to express such actions. And negative sentences, we use the word not. Now, here are some examples of negative sentences in the simple future tense. Amy will not join the debate team next term. Now, remember I said we form the simple future tense with the modal auxiliary verb will and the base form of the verb, that is join in this sense. So here we have will and join. But the only difference is that we find the negative word not occurring between both verbs. The next sentence says, Fola will not prepare well for the spelling bee on Thursday. The same thing happens here. We find the modal auxiliary verb will. We also find the base form of a verb prepare and the negative word not. Eruke will not visit her sisters during the holiday. Will, modal auxiliary verb, visit, base form of the verb, and not, negative word. So this is how to make negative sentences in the future tense. You find out that the negative word not, just as we have on the board, comes between the modal auxiliary verb will and the base form of the verb in that sentence. Now, apart from making negative sentences, we use the simple future tense to ask questions. And when we ask questions using the simple future tense, we want to find out whether an action will take place at some point in the future. So when we want to find out if an action will happen or if something will happen at some time in the future, we ask such questions in the simple future tense. For example, will Ejiro join us for lunch tomorrow? Will Obaro meet us at the library after school? Will you teach me the formula to the mathematics assignment? So these three questions are asked in the simple future tense. Now notice that the questions begin with the modal auxiliary verb will, just as we have here. Will, and will. Will is followed by the subject of the question. The subject here is Ejiro, Obaro, and you. Now after the subject, notice that we have the base form or the ordinary form of the verb, which is join, meet, and teach. So these are the base forms of the verb. And I did say earlier that the base form of a verb is that form which we do not have any suffix or extra letters attached to. We find the base form of verbs in the dictionary. So this is how we ask questions in the simple future tense. Now the next tense we'll be looking at is the future perfect tense. Now what is the future perfect tense all about? Try to think about things that you plan or hope to achieve at a certain age or time in the future. How would you express your completed plan in the future? Now let's ask ourselves some questions that we should answer. What will you have done by 12 noon? What will Nkechi have done at the age of 16? Now, if you answer these questions, you would realize that you would answer them in the future perfect tense. You will have to answer them in the future perfect tense. So, now the future perfect tense is used to express an action that must have begun but has not been completed. For example, I will have completed my assignment by 12 noon. Now notice that this is the reply for this question. What will you have done by 12 noon? I will have completed my assignment by 12 noon. The next question is, what will Nkechi have done at the age of 16? And the answer is, Nkechi will have gained admission into the university by age 16. Then we have another sentence here, Daso will have swept the sitting room before mother gets home. So these sentences we have on the board are actions that are expressed in the future perfect tense. Now let us see how we form the future perfect tense. To express the future perfect tense, we use the auxiliary verbs will and have, followed by the main verb of that sentence, which is usually in its past participle form. For example, will have taken, will have broken, will have escaped. We have the auxiliary verbs will and have, and then the verb in its past participle form. Remember that when a verb comes after the verb have, that verb is usually in its past participle form. So taken is the past participle verb. We also have here the auxiliary verbs will and have, and the past participle form of the verb break is broken. Also, we have the auxiliary verbs here and the past participle form of the verb escape, which is escaped. Now, the future perfect tense is also used to express a completed action in the future before another action occurs. When you want to express a completed action in the future before another action occurs, we use the future perfect tense. For example, Daso will have swept the sitting room before mother gets home. Will have swept expresses an action that should have taken place before mother gets home, which is another action. Onome will have learned French before working in the French embassy. So, the action of Onome learning French should have taken place before the action of working in the French embassy. So, this is another use, or this is another way we use the future perfect tense. Now, still talking about the future perfect tense, we ask questions using the future perfect tense. When we want to find out something that would happen in the future or an action that will be completed in the future, we ask such questions in the future perfect tense. So, we ask questions in the future perfect tense when we want to find out if an action is expected to have been completed at a particular point in time. If an action is expected to have finished happening at a point in the future, we ask such questions in the future perfect tense. For example, will you have graduated from the university by next year? Will you have finished the assignment before the test tomorrow? These questions are in the future perfect tense. Why? Because we have the auxiliary verb will, the auxiliary verb have, and the past participle form of the verb graduate, which is graduated. Same thing here, the auxiliary verbs will and have, and then the past participle form of the verb, which is finished. The difference is that we have the subject of the question between the two auxiliary verbs will and have. The subject for the two sentences is the pronoun you and you. Now notice that we begin the questions with the word will, and will is followed by the subject of the question, which is you, just as we have in the examples. And next after you, we have the auxiliary verb have and then the main verb, which usually is in its past tense form. So this is the formula for asking questions in the future perfect tense. Apart from asking questions in the future perfect tense, we make negative sentences in the future perfect tense. And yes, it is possible to make negative sentences in the future perfect tense. When we make negative sentences in future perfect tense, we say that an action is not likely to have occurred. When you want to say that an action is not likely or expected to have occurred at a particular point in time, we express such sentences, such negative sentences in the future perfect tense. For example, here we have a positive sentence, I will have graduated from college by next year. Now, if we want to change this positive sentence to negative, it will be, I won't have graduated from college by next year. Then we have another positive sentence, you will have finished the assignment before the test tomorrow. When we change it to negative, it will be, you won't have finished the assignment before the test tomorrow. Now note that when making negative sentences in future perfect tense, the auxiliary verb will changes to won't. That is will in the positive sentence, just as we have here and here, changes to won't in the negative sentence. And won't is made up of the auxiliary verb will and the negative word not. So it's just a short form of these two words. Now the third tense we'll be looking at is the future continuous tense. What is the future continuous tense? all about. Note that continuous indicates an action that is ongoing. So we use the future continuous tense to express actions that will begin at some point in future and continue for a period of time. The action will begin at some point in future and continue for a while or continue for some time, still in future. To express actions in future continuous tense, we use the auxiliary verbs will and be, and they are followed by the main verb, which usually ends in ing. These verbs often come after the subject of the sentence. So this is like the formula for forming or for expressing verbs in the future continuous tense. Let's look at some examples. Auntie Nena will be teaching us how to bake next Tuesday. We did say that to form the future continuous tense, we have the auxiliary verbs will and be before the main verb, which usually ends in ing. So here we have teaching. Auntie Nena will be teaching us how to bake next Tuesday. And of course, the subject of the sentence comes first before these verbs. The next question is the same. The spelling bee is the subject. Will be taking place at the school arena later today. We have the auxiliary verbs will and be, and then the ing form of the main verb. On Saturday morning, I will be washing my clothes. I is the subject, and then we have the auxiliary verbs will and be, and of course, the ing form of the verb washing. And then the last sentence says, I will be shopping at Mile 1 Market this evening. I is the subject, then we have the auxiliary verbs will and be, and the ing form of the verb, which is shopping. So this is how we form the future continuous tense, with the auxiliary verbs will and be, and of course the ing form of the main verb. And note that the subject of that sentence usually comes before the verbs. Now, just like the simple future tense and the future perfect tense, the future continuous tense is used to make negative sentences. Now, remember that negative sentences are made by using the word not, which shows that something is incorrect, untruthful, or non-existent. Now, here are some negative sentences in the future continuous tense. Auntie Nena won't be teaching us how to bake next Tuesday. The spelling bee won't be taking place at the school arena later today. I won't be washing my clothes on Saturday morning. I won't be shopping at Mile 1 Market this evening. So these are sentences in the future continuous tense, which are, of course, negative sentences. They just show that something or an action will not be taking place at some point in the future, or something will not be happening at some point in the future. Now, notice from these sentences that the auxiliary verb will changes to won't, and won't is made up of the auxiliary verb will and the negative word not. So its short form is won't. And then, so its short form is won't. Earlier on, in other sentences, which are of course positive sentences, we used the auxiliary verb will and the auxiliary verb be. But for negative sentences, we changed will to won't, as we can see in our examples here on the board. Apart from making negative sentences, we also use the future continuous tense to ask questions, just like the simple future tense and the future perfect tense. When we ask questions in the future continuous tense, we want to find out if an action will begin and continue for some time in the future. When you want to find out if an action will begin or start and continue for a period of time in the future, we ask such a question in the future continuous tense. For example, will you be having lunch at the restaurant this evening? Will Boma be playing for the team in the next football season? Will Chukuma be studying at the library today? These questions want to find out if these actions will begin and continue for some time in the future. Will you be having lunch? Will Boma be playing? Will Chukuma be studying? So that's how we ask questions in the future continuous tense. And note that when we ask questions in the future continuous tense, we begin the questions with the auxiliary verb will, as we have here. Next, after will, we have the subject of the question. And here the subject is you, the pronoun you. Here the subject is Boma. And here the subject is Chukuma. And next, after the subject, we have the auxiliary verb be, and be. And after the auxiliary verb be, we have the present participle form of the action verb. That is the form ending in ing, just as we have here, ing, ing, ing. So this is the formula for asking questions in the future continuous tense. We've come to the end of our lesson today on future tense. Now let's remind ourselves of all we have learned so far. Today we reminded ourselves that tense refers to the form or structure of verbs when they show different times of action. We also learned that the future tense is used to refer to actions that will take place at some point in future. We learned also that the future tense is classified into the simple future tense, the future perfect tense, and the future continuous tense. And lastly, we saw that the future tense can be used to ask questions as well as make negative sentences. Now let's go to our test for today. Our question for today says, what tense is the sentence below written in? Will you attend the school's graduation ceremony next week? Is it A, simple future tense, B, future perfect tense, or C, future continuous tense? The correct answer is A, simple future tense. We did say that to form the simple future tense, we use the auxiliary verb will as well as the base form of the verb. And we also said that we use the simple future tense when we want to ask questions. Although we have the subject of the question occurring between will and the base form of the verb, which is what we have here. So if you picked A, you are correct. Here we end our lesson today on future tense. Thank you for watching and see you next time.